On to our headline interview of the day then. The Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. Mr Gove addressed the Time CEO Summit earlier today here in the News Building just by London Bridge. After that, I sat down with him and we talked about Lord Geit's resignation, whether the Prime Minister is honest and his view on when we should get tax cuts. And there he had a strong message for some of his Cabinet colleagues. We must talk about Lord Geit. Now, he's resigned. We've now had his letter. In it, he said he was asked to sanctify what he says was a deliberate breach of the ministerial code about steel tariffs, which he said would make a mockery of it. But it does rather appear this has been the last straw for him. He talks about the inconsistencies and deficiencies of the Prime Minister's behaviour during Partygate. Do you understand his frustrations?
As I understand it, the reason why he's departed relates to a specific, commercially sensitive economic decision. He felt that it wasn't right for him to play a role in that. I respect that decision, but it's important for the government to do the right thing economically, and I know we will.
Even if it means breaking the ministerial code, because that's clearly what was in dispute here.
Again, I won't make a judgment on that.
Well, he did. I mean, he's just done it.
No, but I won't, because, again, I recognise that this is a commercially sensitive issue. It's not an issue with which I have been involved. I respect Lord Geit, so I don't want to get into a public or indeed a private disagreement with him. But from what I do know, I believe the government is doing the right thing in order to protect jobs at a sensitive time.
Your friend, former friend, tell me if he still is, Dominic Cummings, tweeted last night. He said, "I was sad to see Geit defend the indefensible, and it's good to see he's seen the light." Is Dominic Cummings wrong?
Well, as you know, I've got a deep reservoir of affection for Dom, because I really enjoyed working with him for many years. But I haven't talked to him for a wee while, and I disagree with him profoundly on this. I think that the criticisms that he's mounted of the Prime Minister recently are wrong, and I think the Prime Minister's judgment has been vindicated.
OK. What about the role of the independent advisor on ministerial interests itself, the one that Lord Geit no longer holds? It's been the subject of a huge amount of debate, what powers he should have. Number 10 just today just saying they may review the entire thing. Do you still see the role existing as it should, or do you think it should change?
I'm always open to arguments about how advisors' roles can be enhanced. I absolutely believe that independence is critically important in a role like this, but I also think ultimately, while advisors can provide very, very useful and clear signals and requests, ultimately ministers have to be accountable to Parliament and to the public, and the ultimate accountability rests through the ballot box.
OK. That role, though, that job, he's the second ministerial advisor on interest to go in 2 years. Obviously, Sir Alex Allen went before him. You know the phrase has been batted around: to lose one is unfortunate, to lose two is carelessness. The thing is, Mr Gove, it's not just that. I've got a little list I want to read out to you. It's also 3 chiefs of staff have resigned from number 10, at least 2 deputy chiefs of staff by my count, possibly more, 3 directors of communications, 1 spokesperson and 1 anti-corruption czar. All of that in the space of 3 years under Boris Johnson. That is a Trumpian level of staff turnover.
No, I think it's the case that what we have over the course of the last 3 years have been huge challenges that this country has faced, which inevitably ask a lot of people in the front line of politics and public service. The reason why we've had the changes that you mentioned, is because of the pressures that it inevitably imposes on all of us in public life.
Well, my little pet theory, you may or may not share it, and you know Boris Johnson probably better than most. You've campaigned with him, you've served him for years. He doesn't live by the rules, he doesn't campaign by the rules. In fact, he's made an entire political career of ripping them up, whether it's Brexit, whether who pays for his wallpaper. Now, that has brought him great success, great popularity. It's also put him into trouble as well. And those two together are absolutely very much part of his charm, part of his personality, and part of his problem. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I think that it is certainly the case that the Prime Minister has, at critical moments, stood up for the country and majority opinion in this country.
That we agree on.
Yeah.
I'm saying how. And he's done it by breaking things. And you may well agree breaking things is a very good thing to do.
No, I think that sometimes it is vital to assert that in a democracy, of course there are checks and there are balances, and they need to be policed rigorously. But in a democracy, when you've got a really big situation like Brexit, and so much goes back to the Brexit battles between 2016 and 2019. You have a group of people, and I'm not, what's the word, suggesting that it was dishonourable, but you have a group of people who feel that the country made a wrong decision and were trying to thwart or block or amend it. Lots of stuff going on, lots of noise in politics, but a lot of it dating back to the fact that the Prime Minister, in delivering Brexit, upset an awful lot of people who thought that they were the ones who would determine who won and who lost in politics, not him.
So he remains a paragon of virtue.
He remains the Prime Minister. He remains a kind, generous, and above all, increasingly effective leader.
I want to move on from this, but briefly, what's your message to Conservative colleagues, Conservative MPs, who looked at all this last week, by a very thin margin, agreed to keep him in his job, and now they're looking all over again at the Prime Minister's honesty being called into question? What do you say to them?
I think all of us have a responsibility to deliver the manifesto that we were elected on. You and I obviously operate some of the time in Westminster, where these conversations take place, but for people in Blackpool and Burnley, the most important thing is not wallpaper this or cake that. It is energy bills, the economy, staying in work and getting a pay increase, making sure that they have a decent home, making sure that their children are educated in a good school. Those are the questions, understandably, that preoccupy people.
Let's go on that, because you just spoke on the Times CEO Summit.
Yes.
Interest rates also have just gone up by another 0.25% to 1.25%. That is going to make certainly living with the cost of living harder for a whole load more people with paying their bills. You just said this, so I thought it was absolutely fascinating. When you're squeezing inflation out of the system, it is inevitable you cannot do all the things you'd like to do to help people. What do you mean by those things? What are the things you can't do?
Well, we can't spend all of the public money that many would wish to, and which in a perfect world we'd like to. If I could, I would like to have even more infrastructure in this country being built in order to improve our economic performance long term. But we just don't have the money for that without borrowing even more than we do at the moment. Were we to borrow more, then that would put a strain on public finances overall, and potentially a strain on interest rates, and that would be even greater pain for more. So we have to take a proportionate approach.
Finally, tax cuts is another way of helping people with the cost of living. You know your government's policy is on that. You know a lot of your Tory MPs and some of the fellow members of the Cabinet want the taxes to come down very quickly as well. Is your message to them the one that the Chancellor shares, which is we're going to have to wait before tax cuts, before we can first need to bring down inflation?
Yes.
So that could be 2024, because inflation's going to be high for a good 12, 18, 24 months.
The Chancellor has the right policy, and also I personally don't think that the Chancellor always welcomes advice, and I think that advice from anyone always has greater weight if it's offered in private, and then once that advice has been received, the Chancellor makes his decision, and I think that decision is always more effective if people row in behind it. So far, I have to say I've backed every single one of the decisions the Chancellor's made. I do believe that they have been right, and I have confidence he will carry on making the right decisions.
Michael Gove, thank you for talking to me.